This channel is made possible by viewers like you. Thank you.
Hey weirdo, Lore of the World's here to spoil your day. Well, in a sense at least. Now, I'm sure you're familiar with the overall concept of spoilers, but surprisingly few people have actually talked or written about what makes up a spoiler. And frankly, I would be surprised if I didn't define them very differently than you did. It is a very complicated topic that there is surprisingly little literature about. So what we're going to do in this video is break down the concept of spoilers and explore how they affect or, well, don't affect our perceptions of the media that we consume. And while I will be discussing the concept of spoilers in the greater context of media as a whole, I'm going to be paying particularly close attention to the cause mirror because I can't seem to shut up about it. And it should also be noted that this video contains no spoilers. Or does it? So before we get too deep into the mire, I think it's particularly important that we lay down a sort of dividing line between what I would define as plot spoilers and lore spoilers. Now, plot spoilers revolve around, well, the plot of the story. Lore spoilers, on the other hand, have to do specifically with the world building or other extraneous elements present in a bit of media. Now, this isn't to say that the concepts don't overlap. There absolutely is some gray area in there. And that in particular is what I'd like to talk about. I'll be demonstrating the difference between what I see as plot and lore spoilers using the example of Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. Not only are there world-building elements to clearly demonstrate the concept of lore spoilers, but both title characters actually die at the end of the play. Oh, shoot. Plot spoiler? That's okay though, because this work's been out for over 400 years at this point. You haven't seen it or read it by now, where have you been living, and is it under a rock, and how do I get there? I have a copy of Romeo and Juliet to deliver to you. Awesome. So, we have a piece of media to talk about, and we've laid a tentative dividing line between plot spoilers and lore spoilers. But those are both concepts that I just kind of came up with myself, right? What is the actual literal definition of the word spoiler? Well, I was kind of as surprised as you may be to find out that there really isn't one. There is no definitive, precise definition that we can pull from that covers all forms of media. Sure, there's a Webster's dictionary definition, and Cambridge provides one as well, but I think we can agree that neither of these definitions really capture how complicated the concept of spoilers can be, nor how malleable they are depending on the context and the person that's experiencing said spoiler. I personally enjoy this definition, posted to Urban Dictionary by someone named Phoenix Born all the way back in 2005. The difference is quite subtle, but the important part is right there at the end. It's something which you would have likely rather learned on your own. So that is, in my opinion at least, the key to understanding the overall concept of the spoiler. This is also why people tend to get so defensive about them. You would have rather learned about it yourself, right? Okay, so this is all fine and dandy, but there is one glaring flaw in all of this, and this is all completely subjective. Spoilers aren't determined by some higher power. They're not determined by some sort of spoiler governing body. They're not determined by some sort of god of spoilers, no matter how cool that sounds. Trademark, by the way. No, what constitutes a spoiler is determined by you and me. So, here's the rub. No matter how strict you are about defining spoilers, there is always going to be someone that defines them more strictly. Some folks could and do count movie trailers as spoilers, while other people could make perfectly reasonable arguments that the same trailer spoils nothing. I mean, one could even count the very existence of a piece of media as a spoiler, right? After all, doesn't the existence of Harry Potter 2 kind of spoil the fact that Harry Potter survives Harry Potter 1? What I'm trying to say is if you're so inclined, you could make an argument that anything could be viewed as a spoiler. Again, this is all completely subjective. I could view something as a spoiler that seems more or less trivial to you, and vice versa. But that would impact my experience of that media all the same, and my viewpoint is no less valid than yours would be. So, in consideration to those around us, we should never reveal anything about any piece of media ever, under any circumstances, not even its very existence. But that is, frankly, insane. You are never going to be able to shield yourself nor others from everything someone might consider a spoiler. There's always going to be marketing people that want to show you the book cover. There will be friends that want to tell you about this cool thing midway through a book that they personally don't consider a spoiler, but you might. Again, there is a not insignificant amount of people that consider watching movie trailers to be spoilers. To have a serious discussion about spoilers, we're going to have to recognize that there are levels to all this, and all spoilers can and will be subjective. So let's go ahead and apply all of this to our sample text, and in this case, again, that's going to be Romeo and Juliet. Last chance to get off before I spoil things. I'm just going to list off a few things that happen in the text that I'd like to examine. First of all, the Montagues are fighting with the Capulets.
Stop! Stop! Put up your sword, you know not what you do!
This play has a priest in it. Romeo and Juliet die in each other's arms at the end of the story.
To engrossing death.
Romeo.
So taken to the extreme, all three of these examples of information could be counted as spoilers. But each one of these bits of information is really quite different, right? Romeo and Juliet dying at the end of the story is what I would define as a pretty clear-cut example of a plot spoiler. There's plot, character endings, and the entire climax of the story all kind of wrapped up in that bit of information. If this is revealed to a person that has heard nothing about the play, it will absolutely drastically affect the way that they view it. Most reasonable people would define this as a spoiler in general, and again, on my channel, I would define this as a plot spoiler. Okay, the Montagues fighting the Capulets, though it could be considered a spoiler, is essential to understanding the play. Indeed, it can easily be argued that it is beneficial to know this information going into the play. I mean, it's literally in the prologue. And I know from anecdotal experience that almost every version of Romeo and Juliet I've ever seen, this conflict is explicitly referenced in the playbill. Most reasonable people would not define this as a spoiler. Knowing that there is a priest in the play is where we get into some more interesting definitions territory. On the surface, it doesn't look like a spoiler at all, right? I mean, it's just a priest. There's just a priest in the play. It's not like that bit of information says Romeo and Juliet get married, which I think we can all agree would be a spoiler in this context. Now, you could make a fair argument that this does spoil something. I personally don't know how, but you could. I dare you. I double dare you. But here's the thing. Nothing is explicitly revealed about the plot of Romeo and Juliet by saying there's a priest in there, right? Priests served a number of roles in this time period, and if you knew nothing else about the play, you wouldn't really know the context in which the priest appears. And this lack of complete context is what I would argue makes up a good lore spoiler. At the beginning of the play, you just don't possess the knowledge to understand what the priest's presence is gonna be spoiling. It's only as the play progresses and you learn more about the world and its characters that you start to wonder, like, what is this priest gonna be used for exactly? Will it be a funeral? Do they decide to get married? Is he simply making an appearance to appease the Anglican Church, which was the prominent religious and political force in England during Shakespeare's time, after all? Fun little brief fact, one of Shakespeare's most famous productions, the Scottish play, also called that, only happened because Shakespeare wanted to capitalize on King James's own nerdy interest in magic. Awesome. Oh, hello. You want to talk about spoilers, kitty? Looks like we have a kitty cat joining us, and she will be here for an indeterminate period of time. At the start of Romeo and Juliet, we are basically completely unaware if the priest's presence suggests an impending funeral, a wedding, a political sermon, or some macabre combination of all three. But knowing that there's a priest in the play really only adds to the dramatic irony of the situation as it unfolds. It makes you think and wonder, and as the inevitable wedding draws closer, you begin to realize, oh no, I know exactly what this priest is going to be used for, and it's not going to be good. Now, this bit of information, which again could technically be considered a spoiler, builds upon the tension already inherent in the media rather than reducing that tension. Okay, cool. So, we have a pretty good baseline for how we would define a few forms of spoilers. Hello. But no amount of definition will stop your idiot friend from reading ahead and accidentally letting slip the ending of the story you're both reading. So what do you do then? Do you just try to forget it and move on? I mean, has your understanding of the text changed on a fundamental level? Is it even worth finishing at that point? In the next section, we're going to explore the impact of spoilers and how they affect the media that we consume. But first, an intermission. And don't leave. It's not an ad read, I promise. I don't have nearly enough subscribers for that yet. But look at this face. Look at this poor face. You could make a difference today. Subscribe and help this poor, neglected feline. Okay. Okay. So we're going to pause briefly and talk about a fascinating case study in the world of spoilers. And those folks familiar with my channel will probably be aware of already. I am, of course, talking about Sanderson's secret project. Now, wait up there. I see you trying to leave. Yes, you. Stop it. I'm not going to be actually revealing anything about the secret projects. We're going to be talking about them on a more conceptual level. So, during the 2020 pandemic, Brandon Sanderson went completely insane in the best way possible, writing 4 full-length books in secret. He's releasing them over the course of a year, with one book showing up on backers' doorsteps approximately every 3 months over the course of 2023. Oh, you don't like the secret projects? You trying to leave me? Huh? Huh? What are you gonna do? She's right down here. Crazy cat. Okay. So part of the fun here is the mystery of it all. And Mr. Sanderson is encouraging folks to not read anything about the books at all if they don't want to just go in completely blind. Well, I should say he is making an option available for folks to go in blind. He's also giving those who desire information plenty to go off of, releasing detailed cover art, titles, sample chapters, and much, much, much more. It's a super fun idea, and I applaud him for going to such lengths to preserve a sense of surprise for those folks who don't want to know anything at all about the books until they are able to read them. And while this is all financed through Kickstarter and kind of bypasses the traditional publishing houses, they will still be releasing copies a few months out from the Kickstarter releases. It's a new way of doing things, it's unique. I mean, it's like 4 books in 1 year. How could you not love that? However, not all is sunshine and roses with this project. This has never really been done before, right? Which it's exciting, but also this has never been done before, which means some issues they're bound to pop up along the way. And there's one issue in particular I'd like to take a moment to examine. You see, traditional publishing houses have this whole cycle of marketing and advertisement that they go through, trying to get as much information as possible to as many people as possible to promote an upcoming release. It starts months before release, and there's cover previews, sample chapters release, in-depth interviews, basically everything Sanderson is trying to prevent from getting out to those fans who want to go in completely blind. It's a nice parallel to what we brought up earlier, right? Some fans want to go in with a pristine, completely blank slate for this book's release, and while it's nice to imagine a world where fresh new books from your favorite author show up on your doorstep with minimal prompting, there are obviously some pitfalls that come along with this. And as a side note, I find the extreme lengths that Sanderson is going through to prevent the advertisement of mere book covers to be bordering on farcical in a fun sort of way. But don't get me wrong, I do understand. He is a caring author who considers his fans and what they're asking for. I think he explains it better than I ever could. Let's just take a look at that real quick.
In order to get the secret projects to those who weren't part of the Kickstarter, we needed to partner with my publishers. The publishers have had trouble understanding our desire to keep the titles and everything secret for those who don't want to be spoiled. I gave them permission to put them on Amazon as their listings because that was kind of required by Amazon in order to get these up. But this is a weird thing that we're doing. Tor and Gallant's, their social media teams, haven't quite understood why people might not want to even know the titles yet. We want to keep those who just don't want to know what they're getting at all. We're gonna, if there's any of you left after this week of some of the spoilers being released, we're gonna try to do what we can to help you.
I mean, what a super cool dude, right? So, let's say all of these lengths have been taken, and they failed. You have, bless your heart, you've been spoiled. You've been spoiled so hard. You just accidentally stumbled upon the lower third of Secret Book 3's cover, and you're afraid it's going to alter your perception of the book completely. What is a person to do? In 2018, the Internet Historian released a video titled The Harry Potter Skirmishes.
Hi there. It's me, J.K. Rowling.
It's a pretty hilarious deep dive into the spoiler culture surrounding the last few Harry Potter book releases and the impacts that spoilers had on Mr. Potter's fan base.
The retailer DeepDiscount.com sent the bloody thing out to customers a week early. And the Spoy Boys were more prepared and organized than ever.
In short, it details the lengths that some trolls went to spoil the book's ending for fans in line to buy said book, among other shenanigans. And this wasn't just book 7 either. Book 6 had a significant spoiler issue as well, with S kills D being the most infamous example demonstrated in Harold's video. Also, they sent out a mass email to every member of the official Potter forums containing every single spoiler from the 7th book before most people had the chance to read it.
2:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, someone managed to get access to the site admin. They wrote a message with every single spoiler in it, set recipients to all, and hit send.
Like, don't get me wrong, it's tragic, that sucks, but it's also a bit hilarious when one considers like how many things had to go wrong for it to get to that point, for that to happen to like the literal Potter forums. I digress. Essentially, what I'm trying to get at is this. You can try as hard as you like, but at the end of the day, some dweeb with a cheap megaphone and his stepmom's Toyota Corolla could always pull up with the express purpose of ruining your day. The question then becomes, how do you react to this information? Now, when I was doing research for this video, there's one thing that kept popping up. So some people might tell you that it's not a big deal. right? They'll cite a study done on spoilers by UCSD, the University of California, San Diego. Essentially, the findings of this study seem to indicate that a piece of media being spoiled before consumption of said media actually improves the consumer's perceptions of said media.
Spoilers actually were enhancers. And, lots of people when this finding came out expressed skepticism, even sometimes hostile skepticism.
Or in other words, if you have the ending of a story spoiled, you are more likely to enjoy that story when you read it.
People, when they go to see Romeo and Juliet, don't tell me how it ends. That is, almost everyone going to see Romeo and Juliet knows that Romeo will die and Juliet will die as a tragedy. In fact, the prologue to the play largely tells you this.
If we know that Romeo and Juliet are going to die, we are not only able to pick up on more of the foreshadowing for this event, but our brains may actually be more prepared to handle this tragedy when we see it play out on stage. However, the study in question has a few big issues that make applying the study in a real-world context difficult. For one, the media spoiled in the study did not necessarily hold any emotional attachment to the readers, right? Like, they were just given a sample text to read and either had it spoiled or not spoiled. It wasn't something that they had invested a ton of time in previously. To draw an example for my Stormlight fans out there, hello all. I am sure I would get a lot more hate for spoiling the end of Stormlight 5 than I would for spoiling the end of, Cats the movie. Which, by the way, ends with Dame Judi Dench staring into the camera for 3 minutes straight while she sings the Cats equivalent of a funeral dirge.
With cats, some say one rule is true.
Spoilers, sorry. What I'm trying to get at is that we as an audience hold emotional attachments to the media we consume. And having it spoiled for us really can change the way that we perceive said media. But that isn't necessarily a bad thing.
Really, you read fiction for the beauty of the prose and the cleverness of the construction and insights into human nature. And maybe even knowing the ending is useful because it allows you to focus on these other parts.
And while it may be disappointing in the moment, we do need to keep in mind that books are meant to be reread, right? Media is meant to be reconsumed. Yeah, the story it's going to be changed if it's spoiled before you read it. But if a book is written only to be read once and then all excitement or sense of drama is gone after you've read the end, I would argue that that's not a very good book.
The point is really we're not watching these things for the ending. If that were the point, you could save yourself a lot of time, right? You would just say it was the butler. You're like, wow, thanks, right? I don't have to read the novel.
There's a reason that we like to hear stories again and again. First of all, we just like them. Second of all, we pick up on different aspects of a good piece of media as we re-explore them. As we grow older, certain passages can shift in meaning and take on whole new context for the reader. Hell, even entire books can shift in meaning as we grow older and hopefully a little bit wiser. Any piece of media is, in a sense, a living thing that, while static and unchanging, can continue to unfold and evolve within our minds as the years go on. Okay, too poetic? Okay, here's what I'm trying to get at. If the ending of a book is the only reason you're reading it for, why bother? It makes a lot more sense and is quite a bit more enjoyable to put the journey of reading before the end, the destination. Journey before destination, right? Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Even if you are spoiled for a piece of media, it's almost 100% still worth reading. I see people online all the time I read this minor spoiler. Is it still worth reading the book for? Yes, there's so much more to explore and experience there, right? And you may be disappointed. That's a totally valid thing to feel, but there is still so much meaning and fun to be had on the journey of reading. If you're only doing it for the destination, again, why bother? It's possible that the ending will even take on a whole new context by the time you get there. Any number of things could happen, right? Is learning a character's death a spoiler? Yeah. No, of course. Of course it is. Especially if it's towards the end of the book. However, is it worth throwing the book in the trash? No! Don't do that. Put the journey of reading the book before the destination of the end. It's time for another intermission, I think. So this next little intermission section may contain what you consider to be spoilers, but only for stuff that I've tagged no spoilers on my channel. No, I'm sure you can see the contradiction there, and that's exactly what we're going to talk about. I'd like to focus your attention on my video entitled Every Single Planet in the Cosmere. If you haven't seen it, that's okay. It's not essential to understanding my argument. But I did put a lot of time into making those renders, and I'm honestly incredibly proud of how they turned out. The video's a real banger. Go watch it sometime if you wanna. It's fun, I promise. And if you don't think so, I'll give you your money back. So in that video, I mentioned something that I thought was relatively innocuous, only to find people constantly calling me out for spoilers in the comments of that video. I'd like to take a brief moment to set the record straight and address a few annoyances my audience may have had in that regard. Now, what exactly did I say that annoyed so many people? Let's watch the clip in question. Let's take a little bit of a closer look at those 3 habitable planets. The first in the system is Ashen, an interesting planet that we've heard relatively little about. Though there are no shards present, there are people living here. After an ecological disaster wiped out the planet's ecosphere, the humans on this planet were forced to live in magically floating cities. After the aforementioned ecological disaster, many of Ashen's human inhabitants fled to the next planet in the solar system, Roshar. Roshar is the setting of the Cosmere's high fantasy epic series, the Stormlight Archive. Cool. So, let's break down everything in here that people have told me counts as a spoiler. First off, someone told me that even revealing the existence of Ashen, a planet, is a spoiler. Which, no. The existence of a planet is not in and of itself a spoiler. Clicking on a video entitled Every Planet in the Cosmere will include all the planets revealed thus far, right? And even then, I left out several new planets mentioned in the secret projects. See the first intermission as to why I did that. Next, the human migration from Ashen to Roshar is considered by some to be a spoiler. Now, I have a much easier time seeing why people would consider this a spoiler, but I would ultimately disagree. So I've gone ahead and left out the relevant plot information that would give this statement the context to be considered like a plot spoiler. For instance, with the information given, we have no idea how they got to Roshar, what caused the mentioned ecological disaster, if anyone important came over, why these migrants chose Roshar, what the impacts the migration might have caused. I gave only information relevant to the topic at hand, and I mean, being vaguely familiar with a migration in the ancient past isn't exactly going to ruin a person's enjoyment of the Stormlight Archive. Right? It's just information to get a reader thinking and theorizing without ruining their overall enjoyment of the books. Now, knowing the context behind this information is what makes it appear at first glance to be a spoiler, but I'm leaving out the big stuff. I mean, without context, it's simply migration patterns and ecology, right? Ultimately, the migration from Ashen to Roshar is what I would consider a pretty clear-cut lore spoiler. One last thing I'd like to talk about, the magic system known as hemalurgy. People have called me out for mentioning this magic system in a no spoilers video before, and again, I understand the reasoning, I really do. It's not really explicitly mentioned or explained until a few later books, but the information provided is designed to help the reader start asking the right questions. and it's not really providing enough information to fundamentally alter one's perception of the text on first read. Ultimately, I don't think you would be super disappointed to not have learned this yourself on first read. Okay, cool. Glad I got that off my chest. Let's finish this video with some conclusive definitions for our two different kinds of spoilers, and then talk in detail about my channel's spoiler policy and what that means for you going forward. What is a lore spoiler? A lore spoiler does reveal information contained in the text, or more generally, media. But a lore spoiler reveals information in such a way as to improve one's understanding of the text or the greater world-building concepts present therein. A lore spoiler may even improve one's perception of the media in question, but it does not necessarily have to by default. As an example, the world-building elements of text usually fall under this category, such as when or where a work takes place. Oftentimes, relevant past events fall under this category, so long as they don't reveal anything too large about the greater plot. What is a plot spoiler? A plot spoiler reveals information pertaining to, well, the plot. But more specifically, plot spoilers reveal information in such a way as to fundamentally alter a consumer's first experience with the piece of media in question. For example, revealing the climax of a story would fall into this category, as would revealing almost any relevant event that happens in the back, like 2/3 of a piece of media. But while these definitions are a great starting point to understanding how spoilers may change the way we perceive media upon a first experience, they don't always apply to all stories. Writers love playing with structure and audience expectations, and that tends to muddy the waters a bit when it comes to what counts as a spoiler. These definitions aren't going to fit neatly to every piece of media, and well, that's okay. At the end of the day, these are a good starting point, but, they're also subjective. Everyone is going to have their own slight differences in opinion on this subject matter, which is, again, okay. So, what are my personal thoughts on the matter, and how do they apply to this channel as a whole? My overall view of spoilers has changed dramatically since beginning the research for this video, frankly. I thought they mattered much less than I now realize. I was definitely one of those people that thought that study was the be-all, end-all of spoilers, but the more I researched, the more I came to realize that, there are other factors that influence how we perceive media as well. At the end of the day, if some dude walked up to me on the street and told me spoilers for the end of Stormlight 5, I would feel disappointed, right? There's no doubt about it. Big spoilers inherently change the way we interact with media, the first time we engage with it at least. Now, whether that's a net positive or net negative is, again, subjective, but it is important to preserve some sense of discovery for those that feel passionately about a subject. But, again, it's not the end of the world. Like, if you end up feeling spoiled for a piece of media, so what? Engage with it anyway. You may be surprised with how much you will still get out of the experience. Here, specifically on Lore of the Worlds, if a video is tagged as no spoilers, I won't be mentioning any plot spoilers, but all lore spoilers are fair game. This is a lore channel after all. If a video is tagged as full spoilers, anything in that general property is fair game. Now, specifically for Cosmere stuff, I'll most likely be breaking it down even further, such as tagging it as something like full spoilers Mistborn Era 2, or like full spoilers up to Oathbringer, something like that. And anywhere else in the universe, I will only be able to pull like lore spoilers from, so like the existence of hemalurgy. But all lore spoilers in that universe are de facto fair game. And as a side note, I think spoilers for different aspects of the Cosmere are going to get way more confusing once we start to get closer to the space age, but we'll deal with that as it comes. All other properties I talk about will be much the same, and I'll be clarifying as much as possible during the opening sequence or somewhere similar. I'd also like to very quickly mention one other thing, and that's what I'm calling a spoiler expiration date. Any property I'm talking about will default to using the spoiler tag I've provided for that property. However, I'm going to be giving a spoiler expiry date of 30 years for anything outside of that property, meaning I'll be able to pull examples from other universes with impunity. For instance, if I were to be talking about the Fractalverse in a video tagged no spoilers, I would not spoil any plot elements of the Fractalverse property. However, I would be able to use examples from any part of the first 3 Star Wars movies that came out more than 30 years ago. I would only be able to reference lore elements of the prequel to sequel trilogies, though, and would not mention any spoilers from their plots. And to reiterate, that's a spoiler expiration date of 30 years from the date that the video is released. That should give you more than enough time to experience anything that you really want to experience before the expiry date. This is all absolutely subject to change as you and I figure out what works best for this channel. If we need more spoiler tags or a better system, we'll have it. I would love to hear your opinion on how I break things down and whether you have your own system in place, like when you're talking to friends. Because again, this is all completely subjective. Everyone has like their own view of spoilers and what counts as one and what's frivolous, right? And it's fascinating to see how this all breaks down from person to person, what they define as a spoiler and what is just kind of fluff. At the end of the day, I guess what I'm trying to say is that it is okay to spoil yourself.